Good day, and welcome to this roundtable. I am Willie Reyes, Editor-in-Chief of BusinessWorld, and joining me today are my fellow editors, Kathy Garcia, Managing Editor, Betty Rock, Editor-in-Charge of Banking and Finance, Norman Aquino, Editor who oversees political economic issues, and Mark Amogis, who heads our research team. We are privileged to have with us today Monetary Board member Felipe Medalla, who has been designated as the next governor of the central bank. Dr. Medalla is a leading economist and educator. He was a professor at the UP School of Economics, where he served as dean for 4 years starting 1994. He also served the government under four administrations in various capacities. He was Socio-Economic Planning Secretary from 1998 to 2001 in the administration of former President Estrada and has been a member of the Monetary Board since July 2011. Welcome, Dr. Medalla, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, Doctor, perhaps we can start today's discussion with this, just an overview. Could you just give us an idea of the kind of balancing act that you face? Up to recently, officials have been downplaying the risk, for instance, of stagflation. It's a combination of rising prices and a period of slowing growth. For us, particularly due to the scarring from the pandemic. But just over the weekend, I think it was the presidential advisor for entrepreneurship who said the situation has changed. Stagflation can become a reality at this point. So, what's your own view here?
Okay, first of all, we must distinguish between stagflation in the United States and stagflation elsewhere. The American case is a clear case of over expansionary fiscal and monetary policy that has led to record low unemployments. That's the good news, but has also led to very high inflation. Indeed, their inflation is much higher than ours. And by some streak of bad luck, it happens with the Ukrainian war, which also causing commodity prices, oil, of course, and worse, fertilizer and food prices to go up. This happens as the world was bouncing back from the pandemic, and the pandemic actually temporarily reduced the capacity of many sectors. So this is a perfect storm for the United States. Extremely strong demand in the face of hopefully temporary shortages due to the scarring effects of the pandemic, and then, of course, the inflationary effects of the Ukrainian war. So economists in the United States are still divided whether this will be like a repeat of what happened after the Vietnam War. Mm. What happened in the Vietnam War was the war was very unpopular, but the war itself increased demand for many things. Mm-hmm. But because it was unpopular, they financed it by printing money. So it created a deeply embedded high inflationary expectations that required a deep recession to remove, downgrade the inflationary expectations. And that was what resulted in stagflation. By the way, for those old enough to remember, LIBOR hit 20%. By the way, its spillover effects on the Philippines was terrible because we had a lot of maturing debts. And as the debts were all maturing, we were having a hard time financing it. And the Philippines itself effectively defaulted on its debt by declaring a moratorium later on. So, so my point is, whether there will be stagflation in the United States or not is still, I would say, a 50-50 call, because
Mm-hmm.
Bernanke himself said that the Fed is lucky and good. By the way, in these kinds of circumstances, you have to be both lucky and good, because there are a lot of things that are unexpected that can happen. The United States still has a chance of not having stagflation.
Mm-hmm.
It's something you cannot rule out. So the question is, suppose there's stagflation in the United States, what will happen to us?
Yeah.
And what are the measures that we can take to minimize the effects of the stagflation in the United States on the Philippines? By the way, we're beginning to see this already, because Japan does not have inflation. And because it does not have inflation, it is under very little pressure to
Mm-hmm.
copy the policy rate increases of the United States. Of course, this meant that the yen will fall,
Mm-hmm.
because you're a low interest rate country, and therefore money will move away from you. And what's happening now is the yen is actually the most depreciated currency. I can't remember, 130. And so the problem, you can see this from Japan. The domestic policy says don't go for high interest rates, because we don't have the same problem as the United States. But the spillover effect of the what's going on in the United States, because the capital markets of the United States and Japan are very open, is a very, very weak yen. By the way, if I were Minister of Finance or Governor of Japan,
Mm-hmm.
I will actually not be very unhappy with the weak yen, because that means that my economy will be stronger. My products are more. This is the almost like the best of both worlds, right? Very competitive in the foreign economy,
Mm-hmm.
and yet very low inflation. The problem is, if the yen is falling and it's falling too much, then what will happen to the other currencies?
That's right.
So, so that's we are effectively very little fish in a very big ocean, and the whales are. What happens to the whales will affect us, and we have to be ready. And fortunately, we have very large buffers. And fortunately, we will also have the good macroeconomic and monetary policy to to mitigate the negative effects. Of course,
Yes.
the other question is, do we have the safety nets
Mm-hmm.
to protect the people, especially the poorest among us,
Mm-hmm.
from all these negative forces? Uh, Ideally, we would have the taxing power,
Yeah.
and we have a very good list of who should get ayuda,
Mm-hmm.
and we should have a fast way of delivering it, because there's no way we can influence the high prices. So the
Right.
question is, by the way, really stupid response is eliminate taxes on petroleum products,
Mm-hmm.
because that can seriously affect our access to credit.
Yeah.
And if it's large enough, it may actually affect the confidence in the peso itself, right?
That's right.
So so ideally, I wish I had all the answers. I wish the Philippine government had all the weapons. But
But
what we can do is, of course, if we had a very excellent safety net system, we can at least protect the most vulnerable.
maybe just following that up, Doctor, perhaps what are the biggest risks before we go to the specifics of our alternatives? Just the overview of what are the biggest risks to the economic and inflation outlook? Do you still see, for instance, the economy returning to pre-pandemic growth trajectory? I don't know, sometime within the year, and what kind of risks have emerged?
By the way, 2022 will be a high growth year.
Okay.
Simply because of the huge pent up demand. Uh, what's going on in the Philippines is the relaxation of all those restrictions on people's movements is
Uh-huh.
more powerful than any stimulus you could think of.
Hmm.
So you visit the malls, okay, they're full. People seem not to be afraid of the virus anymore. And speaking from personal experience, I'm dying to go to Palawan. I'm dying to go to Boracay because being cooped up for so long, you want to get out, right?
Hmm.
Having not eaten in a restaurant for so long. By the way, I will not go as far as apologies to owners of movie houses. Go back and see a movie, okay? I see no point in going to a movie and not be able to eat popcorn, because the requirement in that enclosed space. But this year will be strong because the virus the virus seems to not be causing hospitalizations. If
Okay.
this trend continues, this year will be strong no matter what. And
But
with our very accommodative monetary policy.
But
Uh,
just to be clear, Doctor, for the longest time we've been talking about base effects, no? But base effects, have they faded already?
no, not yet, because uh, the many sectors are already higher than pre-pandemic, but
Mm.
relative to what could have been the previous growth potential is still much lower.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are sectors that still 20% lower than pandemic because for number one, the foreign tourists have not come back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there are things that have changed, like maybe a lot of the shopping will remain online and so on and so forth. But if you take out and then also because the pandemic has actually reduced demand for office space.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but for two reasons. One is the work from home. The other one is it also made people reconsider the way they run their offices. So, but on the whole, if you take out three or four subsectors, the current level of the economy is 6% higher than pre-pandemic, 6 to 8%, depending on the sector.
So
But
how long? Yeah.
yeah, but that means that, but still there is quite a bit. The growth that was postponed is coming back.
It's coming
Uh,
back.
although
And
it will take a long time before we bounce back to what could have been.
how
In
long
fact,
would that be?
well, one view is made the calculation 15 years, 10 to 15 years.
Ah, okay.
In other words, but that means our growth has to be higher than historical to do that. If the growth is just equal to historical, then we never go back to what could have been.
Well, for this year it's 7 to 8%. That's a target, and then for the next few years, 6 to 7%. No,
Yes,
that's
if
kind of
that happens,
historical, right? Yeah.
yeah, if that happens, then we will be able to go back to what could have been in about 10, 15 years. But
Oh,
I do not want to look that far because
yes.
there's so many things can happen in the future that we cannot imagine at this point.
That's right. Norman, I understand you have a question.
Yes. Uh, Dr. Medalla, I actually have two questions and I will ask them one after the other to save time. My first question is how how will the central bank bring inflation to manageable levels without getting the country into deeper economic trouble? And my second question is, are the BSP and financial markets being realistic about inflation prospects? I mean, I think for this year, the projection is 4.6% from 4.3%, and for next year is 3.9%, higher, zero point 0.3 point higher than previously expected. Are these achievable?
Okay. Uh, a lot of the inflation that has already happened will be reported as higher year-on-year inflation in the coming 6, 7 months. Okay, let me give you a numerical example. Consider a country that is permanently, for a long time, zero inflation. So the price index will be 100, 100, 100, 100. So year on year is zero because 100 divided by 100 minus 1, minus 1, zero, right? But suppose it has a big shock, 5%. All of a sudden, the price index is 105. And then no other shock. From that point on, 105, 105, 105, 105. Now, what will happen in that case? You will have 12 straight months of 5% headline inflation. And then on the 12th month, it's back to zero, right? So that's the nature of the arithmetic. We are not trying to bring prices back to past levels. We are just trying to bring back increases, the rate of increase to what is consistent with 2 to 4%. Now, do the following exercise. Assume we are back to 2 to 4%. Therefore, your month on month, adjusting for seasonality, your inflation should increase by 3 divided by 12 every month. The moment you achieve that, you will, after the base effect wears out, you will be back to 2 to 4%. Now, I'm looking at the month on month. It's still quite terrible. By the way, there was 1 month that it was 1%. Can you imagine 1 month to the next already 1%? And if that continues, it's 12%, right? Fortunately, we're seeing some signs that the month on month is beginning to normalize. Maybe back. So the question is how fast does the month on month, adjusted for seasonality, go back to 3% divided by 12? Now our own models say that it's going to go back, but because the momentum, the price level is already quite high, we will still have 3.9%. So in other words, there's little we can do to make this year hit 4%. In fact, possible is 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, right? Because what has already happened. But so the question is, by next year, then hopefully we now have a long series of months of inflation that is consistent with 2 to 4. Now, as you can see from the forecast, that's not immediately the case because some of the months in next year will still have some of the influence of this high inflation. That's why we're saying 3.9. But let me clarify what the basis of the 3.9 is. The basis is a scenario about global prices, scenario about wage increases in our model itself. And on top of that, scenario of the Bangko Sentral does nothing. But of course, we will do something, right? And we have already signaled that it's a sure thing that we will raise the policy rate uh, next week. And we're likely to follow that up with another policy rate increase in August.
Yes.
Now, do we do it again in October and December, remaining meetings? That thing is still data dependent. So my point is that we still have the time to do something about the policy rate. To me, 3.9 is uncomfortable because 3.9 is almost the midpoint of 4, right? By the way, if 4 is the midpoint, there's a 50% chance that it will be higher than 4. All right? If our forecast is inflation will be 4, since there are many random things that are going to happen, then it's a coin toss whether it will be higher than 4 or lower than 4. So I'm actually quite uncomfortable with 3.9. That's why we by the way, our own calculation, because by the way, we cannot worship these models too much, but they guide us. Our calculation is a 3.9. The probability that we will exceed the target of 2 to 4% next year is 47%. That's unacceptable. We are an inflation targeting central bank. We cannot respond, we cannot cure what has already happened, which is the supply shocks. But we cannot let we cannot not do something if we think that the inflation we will do our best to make sure that demand is not excessive, to make sure that, and then inflationary expectations do not get disanchored. Okay, so that's the picture. We will have at least 2 more this year, and depending on the data, it can be 4 or 5 more, and depending on the data, some more in 2023. Now, the good thing is we have, as I said, we have plenty of buffers. We actually have 2 weapons for preventing the excessive volatility of the exchange rate. My view is our own. I don't exactly want to call it forward guidance. Our own communication about what we will do, it will itself help already. By the way, of course, my banker friends are saying, "Oh, because of what you said, we're not waiting for you to raise the rates. We will anticipate you, and by so what will happen is as we raise the rates, they have already raised the rates to match the rates that we expected." By the way, that's exactly the art of central banking, so that the market reads what you're going, so what you expect to happen happens a bit sooner. So, at the same time, you cannot pretend to be certain about something you're not certain about. That's why I'm not saying we will do. That's why all I'm saying is, okay, at least 2 more, maybe more. Now the question is, will that kill growth? And my answer is no, because when your expected inflation is higher than 3 and your policy rate is below 3, in real terms, those are still very low commodity interest rates. So of course, some critics would say you should be a little bit more aggressive, precisely because of that. And but at the same time, you're right. There is a balancing act.
Mm.
If you can control inflation without slowing down the economy too much, you'd like to do that.
I think, sir, Betty would have a question. I think along that line. Am I right, Betty?
Yes. Would the BSP consider rate hikes larger than 25 basis points? What would make the monetary board agree on a more aggressive action?
Well, I personally do not like 50 basis points. It signifies that we know something bad that you don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so it could be misread as, wow, what does the central bank know that we don't know? And fortunately, we have the luxury of time and the large reserves. So, uh, because if the markets think we're behind the curve, they will attack the peso.
Mm.
Uh, so, fortunately, the need to look more hawkish than we should be is not there. So we're right now trying to really balance how do we ensure that we do not miss our inflation targets next year, given that we have the supply shocks are so huge, there's nothing we can do about this year. And I would hate 2 years of being, I can blame the first year of the supply shocks. I'm not sure I can blame it the second year that we miss it on supply shocks. But at the same time, I want the economy to be strong, and I don't want to go. I don't want to take too much medicine. If uh, if a smaller dose will cure the illness, I would prefer the smaller dose. But let me tell you, we are an inflation targeting central bank, and we treasure the reputation that we are a responsible inflation targeting central bank. And we will do everything in its power to maintain that hard-earned reputation.
Just to detour momentarily, Doctor, on the matter of the peso, I think sometime late last week you did say that the 53 level was not uncomfortable for you. But then there are some market analysts now who are looking at 55 by year end. What to you is comfortable or uncomfortable here?
Okay, to begin with, what do we do if the Japanese, the weakness of the Japanese yen spills over?
Mm.
Should we, how hard should we fight it? The other way to look at it is what really matters is the average exchange. With the Singapore policy is in a sense very wise, although they're a exchange rate fixing central bank. They fixed the Singapore dollar versus a basket of currency because we don't want to be driven too much by what does push us just what's happening to the yen, what's happening to the US dollar. Do we just so uh, so of course I think the Singapore Monetary Authority uh, keeps the basket a secret.
Mm.
By the way, if they do not change the basket, you'll be able to guess it given enough time. Okay, but at the same, yeah. So my point is, you must remember, although we are so focused on peso dollar, we must remember there are other currencies, and if the other currencies are depreciating faster than the peso, our imports from those countries are likely to be cheaper,
Okay.
offsetting the effect on inflation of the countries that are dollar quoting. because there are countries that use the dollar for pricing. Okay, so we cannot be too doctrinaire on what the exchange rate should be. We have to look at the situation, and the situation where it's a extremely strong dollar, you have to be flexible on what you will do. In the end, you have to look at the inflation rate, not the
Okay.
exchange rate. But of course, to the extent that the exchange rate would make it hard for you to achieve your target, then you got to do something.
Mhm.
Now, there are at least two somethings, right? One is, of course, conventional monetary policy says, inflation target policy says, well, then if be uh, although you don't exactly have to match the U.S. increases, you will be influenced by it. So the key question is how much influence. Remember, the U.S. problem is not our problem.
Mm.
The problem is they did too much stimulus, and they've been increasing money supply like crazy for a long time.
Yeah.
I remember the U.S. balance sheet, the U.S. Fed balance sheet went from 0.9 trillion to now 7.5 trillion. So what they're saying, oh no, no inflation, no inflation, no inflation.
Mhm.
It was true, there was no inflation for a long time. And then they said, oh, transitory, transitory, transitory. So they went from no inflation, no, they went first from high inflation, high inflation, high inflation because of monetary theory. And then no inflation came. They said, no inflation, no inflation, no inflation. And then transitory, 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 and then say, oh, we were wrong. Okay,
Mhm.
that's yellow. So, so we have to watch all of these things carefully, and how this affects the Philippines depends on a lot of Philippine factors as well. Fortunately,
Okay.
so we do not have to match the Fed. We have our own inflation target.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor. Sorry, Betty. I know you have more questions. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Is the BSP looking at a specific time frame from its complete exit from the pandemic-driven easy policy, like to completely unwind the 200 basis points in cut?
Fine.
By the way, the unwinding is a lot more than interest rates. Our balance sheet increased by 1.5 trillion. Uh, Now we have already the Department of Finance has already paid back the 500. So we have to what our plan on the 1 trillion is as they mature, we don't buy. So that will be a very steady unwinding. But in addition, we said to strengthen the economy and help the medium and small scale industries, we said medium and small scale industry loans will qualify as reserves. By the way, we don't normally do that in normal times because that could be distorted. So we will phase that out by end of the year. But we don't want that to be a tightening. So we will actually fulfill our promise moving towards a single digit reserve requirement.
Mm.
Roughly speaking, the equivalent of the reserve equivalents of medium and small scale industry loans, about 200 basis points cut in the reserve requirement. Okay, so we have, in other words, we have quantity policies. Now, how fast do we normalize interest rates? Now, I am myself not sure how fast that will be because, as already pointed out, we care not just about inflation, but the health of the economy. By the way, one good reason to care about the health of the economy is healthy economy and healthy banks go together. But it's in our second pillar. By the way, our third pillar, of course, is the payment system. So I did the following exercise. I went back to our website and looked at what the policy rate is during quote unquote previous normal times. They're all higher than 3%, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want negative real policy rates. But how quickly is very data dependent. We more or less know some of the guideposts. What we don't know is when. So it's like life, right? You you don't know when you're gonna get sick. Of course, we all know we die, but we don't know when. Uh,
Mm.
by the way, that's why you try to behave well while you're alive, no? Because you know that that will happen. So, in short, the guiding principles are clear, but the timing or the details, that was the devil. The timing, what is the devil is in the details. But rest assured, we will carefully review the data to make sure that we are not too late in normalization. Too late
Thank
is
you.
bad. Because, if you're too late, we are very happy that the inflationary expectations are always very close to what the central bank says will be the inflation.
Yes, sir.
To us,
Thank you,
that's
Doctor.
important, very important for our effectivity in the future.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you also for throwing in that note on the outlook for reserve requirement of banks. Betty, you have any other question?
Sir, will the RRR cuts continue to be off cycle, or will we do them along with our policy meeting?
Well, since actually the RR cuts has already been delegated to Governor Joke now, when it happened. I assume it will not be taken back when I become governor. So clearly, it's not no longer mixed up with the policy meetings.
Okay. Do you have any more questions? Mark? Mark, I think you do have questions. A research head?
Okay. I think maybe it's Kathy has a question first.
Oh, Kathy. Yes, please.
Okay, this is a bit more off topic, Dr. Medalla. I noticed many Filipinos are increasingly investing in
Mm.
cryptocurrencies and NFTs, and there's a lot more launches of virtual currency
Yeah.
services. What are your views on cryptocurrency? Because I think Christine Lagarde said last month that she thinks there's no value in cryptocurrencies. And with the increased more Filipinos investing in cryptocurrencies, do you think the BSP should consider issuing regulations to protect consumers? Thank you.
Okay. Uh, this is what this is the problem with economists. They always try to look at fundamentals, but they're also quite aware that irrational exuberance can last for a long time. Okay, so every Bitcoin buyer that I know does not use it for anything. Does not use it for buying anything. Does not use it for paying debt. Does not use it for paying transactions. So the only reason you're holding it is you think somebody else will buy it from you at a higher price. That's a very scary investment. Maybe I call it the greater fool theory. I do not really see why it's valuable, but I think a greater fool will buy it from me. Of course, I am the lesser fool. Okay. Now, so that's why I'm not all very hot about it. However, one can think of a scenario where it's valuable. The scenario is a lot of people want to hide their money from the government. And this is a new tool that adds to the ability to do that. So whoever is, by the way, there are plenty of people who want them to hide their money from government. Okay, so I suppose if you're from China and you're very rich, you you want to hide your money from your government. By the way, that's a human trait. So there may be a value, and nobody knows how much. Of course, the sad thing is, uh, it has so very little social value. In fact, if you believe the government, bad as it is needed and necessary for human existence, then it's bad for society that you're creating a tool that's helping people hide their money from government. So, but at the same time, it's something that we have to accept that's there. But my view is the moment you cross from the virtual world to the fiat and physical world, you you have to have KYC. The moment you change all of that to you go to a bank and change that to money that can actually be used. By the way, that's precisely the problem with it. It's money that cannot be actually used. Okay, go to the department store and see if you can use to pay it. Buy a car and see how. Then the government should have the ability to see through the transaction and apply exactly the same anti-money laundering and KYC, know your customer policies. Now, as to consumer protection, should I save the fools from themselves? No, because it could be that they're the lucky fool, right? I mean, the price may rise, and on the other hand, they lose money, they have only themselves to blame, right? So I don't know, but of course, if asked what I think about it, I'll say exactly what I told you. So, but how far does the government protect people from themselves? Very hard, because to begin with, I'm not certain that my analysis is correct. Okay, so, but the moment it enters the public sphere, in other words, whatever rules we have with the fiat currency, bank deposits should apply when they cross over. Okay, and that's why we will have so-called, we have already a lot of regulations on virtual exchanges. The places where where these virtual exchanges cross over to start delivering uh, cash either electronically or physically.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Doctor. Perhaps we can just have the last one or two questions. Mark, would you like to ask?
Okay. Thank you, sir. Good morning, Dr. Medalla.
Hi, good morning.
The BSP sees rural banks to be instrumental to achieve its goal to onboard 70% of Filipino adults by next year. As part of the Rural Bank Strengthening Program, a recent draft circular seeks to hike minimum capital requirements of the small lenders to 60 million up to 200 million pesos. But rural banks said this could hurt and may shutter the operations for some of them. Should this be implemented immediately? Would you be willing to extend the compliance period to allow rural banks to raise needed capital? What other measures you can propose to alleviate these rural banks' capital plight?
Okay, first, the rationalization for the minimum capital. Every time we close a rural bank, it's because even without bad loans, they are having difficulty making a profit. For instance, there are rural banks with uh, annual operating cost of, say, 5 million pesos, which is not a lot, right? Because you have a lot of expenses. And the interest margins are about exactly that, or even less. So one little mistake and they're dead. So clearly, in other words, there are economies of scale. If you, by the way, they cannot even have checks and balances. The general rule is employee handling the cash should not be the employee handling the records. But if you're so small, you cannot afford that kind of division of labor. So you'll have more employees. Hindi na tama, hindi mo na kaya yung 5 million salary for having a complete staff with checks and balances. So yan. So in other words, size is necessary. Now my point is, if you want to remain a mom and pop operation, do not be a rural bank. There are other businesses you can be in, like microcredit and things like that. Okay, so clearly the justification for higher capitalization is you want to protect the depositors, right? And a rural bank that who could barely earn interest margins to cover electricity and salary is always a disaster waiting to happen. Okay, how fast should we move to what's rational? The answer is very fast, not very fast, but not very slow. But I guess 10 years is too long, right? Because I've heard appeal for 10 years. Huh? By the way, if you wait for 10 years, with inflation, you will already meet the target without, in real terms, we have not really made any changes. So my view is, if there are rural banks that are below the targets, the regulations, but they have fantastic records, then of course we can probably say, oh, you're the exception. We'll give you time. But if you're the barely you've lost money the last 3 years, okay, and there's no prospect of you making money because you can barely cover operating costs. I don't think we would rather that you voluntarily either you merge with somebody, get a bigger player that can come in and help you expand, or of course you can voluntarily uh, close so that in a very orderly manner you can give the money back to the depositors and you can collect all your loans. Okay, so we were willing to give time for that. Okay, but of course the discussions with the rural bankers will continue, and if we can find a, tweaking that can improve, that can help us achieve our objectives and give them time, we are willing to look at that. But I already gave you an example where we are willing to, a bank that has a fantastic record, always made money, makes very few bad loans. I mean, we should be a little bit more lenient in those cases. But that was, we will have exceptions if that makes sense. Otherwise, my view is let's do this in the most reasonable amount of time as possible.
Another question. would you be willing to approve more digital banks, presently capped at 6 during your term? By how many?
Well, we will watch. We will watch first. We will
Mhm,
see first how the environment. Okay, this is the problem. Our ability to regulate must also grow.
mhm,
So what we don't want is that's a rapid expansion, the ability to regulate digital banks. The more that was we should have at least enough examiners, enough experts
Mhm.
to regulate and protect the public. That's the reason we want to pace we have to be very very careful. This is a new thing for us. The central bank itself is developing the capacity to regulate. So I wish we can do it faster, but hiring people, training people. Uh, by the way, the other thing is the examiners who gain experience from dealing with the six will teach the new ones. Okay, so that's the reason we don't hate competition, but we better have the capacity to regulate, not be outstripped by growth of what we regulate.
Doctor, how long do you think will it take to achieve that kind of expanded
Maybe, maybe,
capacity?
maybe in 2 or 3 years.
Mm.
Maybe in 2 or 3 years. Our capacity will be equal to the task that we can really say anyone who wants to come in and meets the
Mm.
capital requirements and the technical requirements.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay. Mark, any more? Any more question? That's it.
none so far.
That's it. Okay, so that was the last question. Thank you, editors. Perhaps to close, Doctor, what's your message to our viewers, the public, markets, no?
Okay.
Particularly on what we can
First of
expect from the
all,
BSP under your watch?
okay. Now to the Filipino people, my message is very simple. We have three pillars. The entire organization, from the governor, plus the 5,000 plus employees of BSP. Those three pillars are extremely important to us. We will do we think by the way, we want, of course, the three pillars to also contribute to both inclusive finance and inclusive economy. Although we have very limited influence on the real economy because those are really the line ministries of government. But that's what my message is. We take the three pillars: stable prices, price stability, financial stability, and a safe, efficient uh, payment system very, very seriously. And of course, to the extent that our actions can speed up digitalization and financial inclusion, those are the things that we will focus our efforts and our resources. And with the help of journalists like you, our job will be easier.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Medalla. And that
Well, thanks
wraps it.
also. Thank you very much also.
Thank you. And that wraps it up for this conversation, everyone. Thanks for watching.